from Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, the largest foreign policy association in Indonesia. And as you may know, that one of our big initiatives is concerning 1,000 Abrahamic Circles program, which is a program to get the followers of the three Abrahamic religions, especially at the grassroots level, to push back on age-old stereotypes and develop mutual respect. Because in our view, freedom alone is not enough. What's the use of freedom when you don't respect one another? So that's why we think that respect is the other side of the coin of freedom. Right? So that's the basis of our promotion of 1,000 Abrahamic Circles. And also we believe that despite the fact that there are so many countries which does have democratic systems, does have rule of law, does have religious freedom and tolerance at the structural level, and all these great things. But still at the grassroots, the reality is we still have pockets of bigotry, and many of them. And this is true both in developed countries and developing countries, right? So this is, I think, a challenge for us, and we do worry that this is going to be a worsening problem for interreligious affairs, right? For many reasons. Populism is rising, identity politics is rising, economic marginalization is increasing, political polarization is rising, which means you're looking for somebody to blame. There's more geopolitical rivalries, and there's not great efforts. There are some efforts, but they're not great efforts to systematically fight off bigotry and prejudice and so on. And what we're seeing is one of the trends of terrorism, where members of certain religions who are praying in the house of worship are now being targets of terrorism. Right? So, for example, in Indonesia, there was the terrorists exploded bombs in a church, which means what? They only want to kill Christians. Right? In Christchurch, a terrorist shot at Muslims who were praying in a mosque. Right? And then several weeks later, terrorists bomb churches in Sri Lanka. Right? And after that, a synagogue in Germany was attacked, and also in LA was attacked. Obviously, because that's where you can find Jewish people and while praying. So there's a tendency to surgically target certain members of religion at their house of worship. Right? I mean, all this points out to the fact that things need to get better, because at the direction that we're going at now, things are quite worrying in terms of relations between peoples of faith. And with that, we are delighted to have this discussion today. We have three prominent speakers. We have Ambassador Musi Hailu, the Director of Global Partnership of United Religion Initiative, URI, which is a partner of FPCI and a partner in the 1,000 Abrahamic Circles project. He served as a diplomat in the rank of Ambassador and Special Envoy of President of Burundi. And now he served as United Religion Initiative Director of Global Partnership and URI representative at the United Nations and the African Union, and URI Africa Regional Director. And he's also a founding member of URI. You have a lot of hats, Mr. Musi, right? So thank you for joining us. And our second guest is Rabbi David Rosen. He's now speaking to us from Jerusalem. He's the American Jewish Association Director for International Religious Affairs. He also directs AGC's Heilbrunn Institute for International Interreligious Understanding. and he's a member of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel's Delegation for Relations with World Religions, and is International President of Religions for Peace, and also honorary president of the International Council of Christians and Jews, and the Jewish representative on the board of directors of the King Abdullah International Center for Interreligious Dialogue. He was part of the Israeli team that negotiated full relations between the State of Israel and the Holy See, and is the past chairman of IGCIC. In 2005, the Pope made Rosen a Knight Commander of the Order of Saint Gregory Saint Gregory the Great, in recognition of his contribution to Catholic-Jewish reconciliation. And in 2010, he was named Commander of the British Empire of Queen Elizabeth II for his interreligious work. And from 1979 to 85, he was the Chief Rabbi of Ireland. So I think Brad Pitt is going to play you in the movie, right? You have such an illustrious career, and actually you do look like Brad Pitt a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And the third speaker is from Indonesia, Ms. Dwi Ruby Khalifa, who is the director of the Asian Muslim Action Network, or AMAN. I like that singkatan AMAN, which means safe in Indonesian. She focuses on strengthening leadership of grassroots interfaith women and consolidating progressive voices to advocate the rights of minority groups. She earned her master's degree on health and social science from Mahidol University in Thailand. I think you are very unique, being an Indonesian, who studied in Thailand. Well done. And the thesis has been published in a book entitled "Contexting Discourses on Sexuality and Sexual Subjectivity Among Single Young Muslim Women in Pesantren." Very, very interesting topics. So welcome everybody. We have a good audience who are listening to this conversation. Let me begin with the first question. Why do you think interreligious tension took its toll in 2020, last year? And how should we move forward in 2021? Anyone want to answer that question? Please go ahead. Rabbi, can we start with you?
Okay, thank you. It's a really interesting assumption that you're making there, which I think is widely held. And I'm not sure that it's a correct one, both generally and specifically. Let's talk about it generally. I think today people have the impression that our world is a worse place than in the past. And I think part of that has to do with the blessing of modern technology. Today, almost all the major tragedies that are taking place in the world and the suffering is brought in through modern technology, whether it's through the television or so-called social media, to masses of people in a way that it never was before. And then there is something rather problematic in the nature of humanity. We seem to like the sensationalist and the negative and the blood and guts more than the good stories. It's the negative that gets the rating and that boosts, therefore, sales, whether it's of newspapers or whatever, etc. Maybe Christianity has it right about original sin. Personally, that's not my faith teaching, but there does seem to be something rather problematic within the human breast that seems to be drawn to these elements. And therefore, as a result of both this human problem and the technological capacity, people are saturated with negative information. And the positive information, in most cases, they're not aware of it. But the truth is that today, there has never, ever been more interreligious collaboration, cooperation, mutual respect, knowledge than ever before in human history. And it's an exponentially growing industry. My colleagues here, whether it's through URI or Religions for Peace, all the other religious initiatives, such as your wonderful initiative of the 1,000 Abrahamic Circles, all these things were never possible in the past. They couldn't even be dreamt of. So there's an enormous amount of goodness in the world and more understanding and collaboration. But of course, it's much easier to destroy a building than to build one. And the negative gets much more coverage. I think that this year of COVID-19 has also demonstrated both, again, the good and the bad. It's demonstrated our inextricable interrelatedness. that we not only, it's not right that we should try to avoid one another and not to know one another, but that we cannot anymore, if we wanted to, live in isolation of one another. At best, we infect one another. I mean, at worst, we infect one another. At best, we can find a solution as to how to be able to deal with these issues. So, but at the same time, fear is easily manipulated. And as you already indicated, there are all kinds of destructive forces that seek to take advantage of the situation. And in many cases, they might even be innocent malevolence. They might really not know any better. But today, once upon a time, a marginal crackpot voice was marginal. He was crackpot. People didn't take it seriously. It was hardly accessed. Today, these voices can access mainstream mass communications just as much as responsible avenues can. And therefore, people have the difficulty of being able to make a distinction. So I'm not sure that from a value point of view, we are in a worse situation. I actually think we're in a better situation. Mm. I think that the negative, however, has more visibility and in effect has more destructive power, has the capacity to do more damage. And therefore the challenge is, how do we grapple with these negative forces? We both have to act out of defense. In other words, you need legislation. There needs to be more diligence, and there needs to be more accountability with regards to these various forms of media. But that's not good enough. It's not just reactive and defensive. We have to be proactive. And proactive means that we've got to be more involved in educational initiatives such as your own. We have to be visible, like this webinar. We need to see Muslims, Christians, and Jews collaborating. The message, therefore, needs to be visible, that we are of one family, first and foremost the Abrahamic family, then of the human family. The more we get that message across, the more we will reduce the impact of negative forces.
Yeah, thank you. I really like that message that there's a lot of good news out there. But may I follow up with that question? Because I noticed that even among the pockets of negative forces, you know, those who are anti-Semitic or those who harbor Islamophobia and so on, do you see that they've been somewhat emboldened in recent years?
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. And
undoubtedly.
Why is that so? Yes.
And that when within the Jewish community people talk of a resurgence of anti-Semitism, they're not deluded. It's not a mirage. There really is an increase, but it's an increase, I believe, by a small component. I think amongst the vast majority of people, anti-Semitism is being reduced. I believe there are less anti-Semites in the world than there were in the past, because more people have the opportunity to be educated, informed, and to understand that they've been victims of prejudice. But those pockets of anti-Semitism, and the same applies to anti-Islamic or anti-Christian sentiment, have got the capacity today to have more voice, more visibility, and more destructive powers than they had in the past. So it's a paradox. They're both at the same time.
Okay. Let me, I think I see Ambassador Musi connection went down. So we're going to turn to Ruby. Ruby, your comments?
Yeah.
What is the state of relations among religious communities in recent times?
Yeah, so first of all, let me reflect my personal experience. One day when I walk in talking about intra, this is very crucial in Indonesia. I walk alone in Jakarta at nighttime, and I didn't expect that somebody following me. And then suddenly I stop and turn back and then ask him why he's been following me. And then he said that I want to do da'wah. I want to preach to you. Why you want to preach to me? Because the way you're wearing hijab is wrong. That's really shocking me. I never imagined in my life somebody just stopped me because of the way I'm wearing my hijab. And that is unbelievable. Never happened in Indonesia before. And I feel like this is very much sad. As a Muslim, normally we are very humble. If we don't agree with somebody in expressing their religiosity, we normally quiet. We know that in Islam we have multi-interpretation. and there is no single truth. And then we've been taught that since the beginning that we believe on the different school of thoughts, and that exists in Indonesia, though maybe only one that's actually been very popular. So Indonesia currently, I think, is much more dealing with intra-faith. We facing a very serious issue in intra-faith, though that's actually reflect to inter-religious relation. For example, I think the case in Jakarta election before are very strong to see how people adopting the wrong message relating with the one of the interpretation relating with the way we choose a leader. And there is a huge actually follower for those who believe that the leader should be a Muslim, and without considering any qualification. And that actually very dangerous, and that actually buying by some of the politicians that actually using the power to to create even bigger message in order to win in such a way. So that actually creating a lot of tension on the ground. When we visited the community, even the tension about the battle in the politics, and after that, it's still people are segregated. People feel that all that they're receiving from social media, all that been used by political party for the campaign, all are truth. And this is for civil society like me, we need to really peeling one by one and then clarify all the issues and trying to find a way how actually we can reconcile. And for me, this is very much a timing to revisit the way we understand our diversity, our pluralism and multiculturalism. Are our people really understand about what is being multiculturalism, and why Indonesia founded as Indonesia and consisted of a different religion and also culture. Why this is source of a big power for us at the national level as well as in the world. I think somehow people need to educate about it, and that's actually competing with delusional messages that's actually spreading by the particular group, and particularly for the extremist group are very much actually promoting homogeneity, and this is our one of our homework. The other is I'm feeling as people working at the grassroots level, I think the space of exchange gradually is shrinking. We don't have a good quality of interacting one another, but we are so much actually spending our time in social media and very instant and don't really have a feeling a touching. Not only that, we're realizing that our skill of dialogue even very low. In particularly, it's not about dialogue, it's about somebody talking and okay, I understand, and that's it.
Yeah.
But
so let me ask David Rosen about that. That's an interesting observation. David, how has been your experience on conducting interfaith dialogue? What has been the challenges? Ruby says sometimes people are not really talking to one another, and so on and so on. But what has been your experience?
So it's really interesting that Ruby started off with focusing on the intrafaith aspect. Very often for those of us working in the interfaith field, and that is my vocation to which my life is dedicated, it's often more difficult within our own communities to be able to convince people of the importance of the dialogue than it is with our interlocutors. And in some ways that's obvious, because almost by definition, the kind of people we encounter in interfaith meetings are those who are already converted. They already see the value and the interest in it. But within our communities, and especially within a Jewish community, you know the famous joke about Jews: just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not trying to kill me. So we have a long history of paranoia with good reason, and it's to some extent this like trauma is almost in our blood, and therefore there's a great deal of suspicion with regards to those who seek to reach out, and especially the more religiously observant, the more deeply rooted elements within religious tradition tend to be more suspicious, and that's understandable too. So this becomes, often it's much more of a challenge for me to work within my own community than it is to work within other communities. But
Okay.
my experience of interfaith is actually very positive. And again, a silver lining of the cloud of COVID-19 is the fact that we have adapted to modern technology with such intensity and rapidity. So like we are doing today, it's now become normative to work on Zoom and webinars like this. And that's really been a blessing for me in particular, because I'm now accessing many, many more thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands than I would have done were I to be traveling. And I still have the benefit of my health that I don't need to travel as much anymore.
True.
Yeah. Well, we keep missing Ambassador Amos. He keeps, I think his connection is down. So we're gonna just carry with the two of you until he shows up, right? So now there's a lot of economic hardships, around the world. Millions of people in America, tens of millions lost their jobs. In Indonesia also, I think about 12 to 15 million people lost their jobs, and all around the world. I'm just wondering, your take, does economic hardship first increase religiosity? And secondly, does economic hardship increase a sense of religious exclusivity and makes relations among different religions harder? For example, one would blame another religious community who are doing well off for the economic hardship and things like that. How do you see this? Are these things going on, or they're not really a problem?
So who you are?
Ruby, you wanna address this here?
I want to. This is very unique, Dino. According to one of the research done by the study on behavior, that actually during COVID, there is the increasing culture of empathy. And I prove it in our community. We've been working in 39 communities in Indonesia and 7 provinces in gathering interfaith mothers. I think one thing, the big lesson for me is that's not happened. The interreligious is become stronger. Intra-religious is also stronger in that community. But you will face very different when we go to social media. But in community, perhaps we investing in our women leadership, that when crisis happen, and they are quickly actually taking action, protecting the community, in particularly actually helping the community who are in need. That is amazing for me. In particularly, they're also very open for minority groups, including LGBT community that exists in some of the area. So it's very different than the previous one. That's normally this group in neglected, but this time the strong culture of empathy is really helping a community to move together, as well as ensuring that the government program is really meeting the need, and all the people who are really need is receive the help from the community. However, social media's voices are very different, in particular for misconception and a lot of prejudice against Chinese, for example. But I don't see this happen in real, the attack and so on. But I don't see that. Yeah. So I'm very optimistic because the growing voice, positive voices and optimism is still there in our community.
Okay, good. David, what is the impact of the economic hardship on religiosity?
Yeah. I very much resonate with what Ruby said. In fact, there have been some very, very positive developments in Religions for Peace, of which I'm one of its presidents, established as very early on when the pandemic broke out, a multi-religious humanitarian fund, which therefore is contributed to by different religions for the purpose of not dealing with their own communities, but dealing with the needs of communities around the world. There's been wonderful interreligious collaboration and cooperation in that regard. And at the same time, obviously, this has been a field day for conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories prevail. And of course, the historical target for conspiracy theories has always been the Jews. It's like the joke, you know, down with the Jews and the bicycle riders. Why the bicycle riders? Why the Jews? and I never really understand where this comes from, but because in most cases history we've been the other, so we've been a convenient target. But where there are conflicts and where there are prejudices, then these have been, as it were, galvanized by the conflict. So again, it's this double-edged sword. It's this Janus-like reality, the good and the bad together, both increasing.
Yeah. Well, isn't it true that during the time of COVID, science rules and political leaders must always make their decisions based on science and evidence? I'm just still trying to understand how come this still gives rise to a great deal of conspiracy theories, which is not based on science or evidence, at a time when we actually need more science-based perspective.
As you know as well as any of us, conspiracy theorists don't need truth or reality in order to be able to hawk their wares. And almost the definition of conspiracy theories is precisely a denial of science and therefore denial of truth. So that is, again, I mean, we live in an area where fake news is easier to generate than ever before. And very often, even heads of governments who condemn fake news are the disseminators of it themselves. So this is definitely a challenge we have. But you know, your question is really very germane within the Jewish community, because within the ultra-Orthodox community, often referred to as the Hasidic community, we have a big problem here in Israel with that community. It's both to do with the social structure of those communities, but it's also to do with the fact that that community is essentially anti-modernist. It's trying to isolate itself from the impact of modernity, and therefore they try to live separate from the rest of society. They don't really want to mix with the rest of society, and therefore they're suspicious about the rest of society, about the rest of Jewish society, let alone the rest of the world. And therefore they're suspicious about secularism, therefore they're suspicious about science. And that makes it very easy amongst them to be able to generate conspiracy theories. And I think you find that amongst some of the more how should we say, the more isolated ideological communities, that conspiracy theories are very easy to produce. But in the end, a conspiracy theorist is somebody who, like so many other areas of hate, is emotionally damaged. People who peddle hate are emotionally damaged. They are people who live in some form of fear, and they don't live within a world where they can understand it. Just as in the Middle Ages, people peddled all kinds of theories because they didn't understand science. They didn't understand what germs, they didn't understand viruses, all these things. Today we have that ability to know, and therefore people who peddle these theories are very often in some ways either damaged or, I would say, part of an anti-scientific worldview.
Okay. Now, Ruby, I think you must have read in recent days in Indonesia, there's a controversy or outrage that a non-Muslim woman in Sumatra was forced to wear hijab.
Oh yeah, recently, so yes.
Yes, and I think that one response from an official there was that, see, because we put a hijab on her, then the mosquitoes cannot get to her, right? Something like that.
Stupid.
So I'm just wondering, you know, you in your work, I'm sure you meet a lot of, hard minds. People are used to thinking a certain way and sometimes impose their ways on others. How do you break that? How do you undo that? Yeah. And David, same question to you, because I know in Israel there's quite a bit of that as well. Right? So after that, I would like to get your answer. Yeah, go ahead, Ruby.
Yeah, I think one of the very dangerous in our development, and particularly in bringing religion in our, life, and then many people so enthusiastic in, putting religion in any kind of aspect. And particularly, we're talking about the, a public policy. And as a Muslim, I always reject that formalization of religious teaching into the policy, because it is very dangerous. We understand that the nature of religion has multi-interpretation, and we have to respect on that. And then when it comes to formalization, it means that it's only allowing one single interpretation, and that is really neglecting others. And that's starting actually, we forced to believe to have one truth. And for Indonesia, of course, I agree with the national attitude that it shouldn't happen. It need to abolish. At the community level, it's much more easier, Pak, because the community has space for dialogue. The community has space for listening the difference, though it is at the beginning maybe difficult. For example, one of the project that we are initiated in the central Sulawesi after the conflict situation where Muslim and Christian are still holding distrust. We started the peace building a project by opening organic farming. That is just strategy, because so many abandoned land in central Sulawesi, and then we use it, and then the people love it because they can gain the economic how do you call it, benefit. But not only that, beyond that, the intensive interaction with the people in the safe space, that actually why the program it become so special is because they don't see it after the conflict. So it's just like they're just leaving. There's no meaningful interaction among them. So through the organic farming, that actually the women able to engage the children and then the husband, and they interact to talk about the life. They don't talk about theological thing. They talk about the life. When the trust growing, and then we can actually facilitate to talk more, sensitive issues. So what I'm expecting in the future, that this kind of rooms, the safe space, should available, in many places, not only at the community level, but also I think at the national, so that make people comfortable to express their own religion.
David, how do you deal or soften hard minds, or orthodoxy, if you call it that?
So
I hope it's not a sensitive question. Yeah, it can.
No,
be.
It's not. I mean, I'm very, very happy. I think it's very important to address the question. The problem is I don't know whether we have the time, because it really needs a complete seminar in its own to be able to describe the nature of our particular society. I'm happy to do that if you want to make a date for the future. But in the meantime, let me say that Israel is a secular society. It's not a religious state. It's not a confessional state. That is to say, there is no imposition of religion on the other. The only area where there is freedoms are limited is actually not an Israeli invention. It goes back to the times when this world was ruled by the Ottomans, the Turks, and it's the millet system, and therefore all matters of personal status, marriage, divorce, membership of the community, that is in the hands of religious communities. But other than that, this is a society in which people can defame religion, they can blaspheme, and there is no, I use that as an extreme example, and there is no penalty for that. So there is certainly not a religious society in that sense. You know that the most important aspect of Jewish religious observance on a weekly basis is the Sabbath. The reality of Sabbath in Israel is not to be seen in the synagogues of Jerusalem, but on the beaches of Tel Aviv. Now, I'm not happy about that, but I'm happy that people have the choice to make that decision. And that's what I want to live in, a society where people only choose to be religious, not that anybody is forcing anybody to do so. Now, the majority of people who will define themselves as religious in Israel are still part of a secular worldview in as much as they have a general education, and they appreciate the value of freedom, and therefore they're not seeking to impose themselves upon others of difference. But the ultra-Orthodox community, or Haredi or Hasidic community, that's a totally different kettle of fish. They play the democratic game, but they don't really believe in it. They play in it because by getting involved in politics, they can get the goodies and therefore the slices of the different resources for the needs of their particular community. And therefore, they are in coalition governments, but they don't really believe in democracy. And if they could impose their will upon the majority, they would. But thank God, they're only 10% of the country, and therefore they can't. But 10% is enough to be essential for coalition government. And therefore, no government, no party in Israel has been able to rule without the support from these different elements, and not capable at the moment. And therefore, as a result, this is a classic example. At the moment, our prime minister wants to be able to have a maximal shutdown. He's closed the airports. But the pandemic is increasing at an enormous rate amongst the ultra-Orthodox. Now, he could simply resolve that. He could simply basically cut off those cities where they live in isolation anyway, and not allow people to go in and out of those cities. Why doesn't he do that? Because they don't want to do it. And if he does it, they will leave his coalition government. And therefore, its government will fall. And therefore, in other words, in the end, it's not ethical principle that is at stake here. It's a matter of political survival. And that's the reality with politics around the world.
Very, very interesting. We're still missing Ambassador Amos. I don't know what happened to internet connection. I hope it's okay. And I hope he's not in the dark as the screen shows. Ruby, let me ask you this question. Look, the Islamic world was angry at President Macron, recently. Not for, I think it's when he stated that freedom of speech and so on would allow for the drawing of Prophet Muhammad, right? Yeah. Which is in Islam is sinful, right? I'm just wondering, how long are we going to be stuck with this situation? Because this is definitely a cultural clash. On one side, yes, they see it as freedom of speech. Yeah. But on the Islamic world, they see this is an assault on our religion, right? And I'm really glad that Pope John Paul has come up in the open. Sorry, not Pope John Paul, the Pope, Pope Francis has said that he doesn't condone the French view. He says, look, if you insist on insulting a religion, you should expect some backlash out of it, and that's what we don't want. But as a Muslim. And you're still young, obviously, and this is going to be something that is going to recur over and over again. Well, what is your perspective on this?
When that's happened, I believe everyone actually see how social media reacted, and then first I want to appreciate with the Indonesia government came up with a very strong statement that I'm sorry, it's very different with somebody very high profile from Malaysia, putting on Twitter. The statement from the president is two things. Of course is feeling not comfortable, like me also, I'm feeling not comfortable. But the other is actually kind of encouraging the Muslim not to reacting on this, or not putting this as a reason in breaking a relation with a different faith. I think that, or another word, the president asking for still in unity, and then believing that Indonesia can be a good example on that. With that, actually, what happened on the ground is people listening what president said. That was very fortunate for us, having strong figure that not pushing into more reacting and angry and even allowing for anybody to do that. And I am glad, and this is a time for all of us actually to revisit our belief on freedom of religion. Doesn't mean absolutely freedom, but need to have respect to others, because this is the way that we live in the world. And also, I actually one thing that I realizing that this is also a part of, for Muslim to revisit our belief and interpretation. And why in social media there's so much and more popular the the very conservative interpretation on religious texts been accepting by many people, and why the progressive voices not so much popular. And that's become the reflection among Indonesia women ulama. We have women ulama congress in Indonesia, and realizing that how little the effort that putting among a progressive ulama into ulama is the cleric into the the social media, comparing to the very conservative that they are also using industria. They're actually doing fabricating the words, and then they're putting on the social media with big money. And we don't do that. We're doing a very natural, and that's still not balanced. So how we can actually have strong power as well, and then bring the progressive interpretation into the the social media. And I think Indonesia have a lot of good lesson on that. In particular, we talk about the women rights and Islam in Indonesia very advanced, and this should be one of the power that Indonesia can influence the other Muslim country as well.
Thank you. I told my French friends that the line of President Macron took on this issue was a bit weak. What he should have said something like what Justin Trudeau said. Yeah. Rather than just talking about freedom of speech, you should say, yes, we have freedom of speech, but when it offends a particular group, you should be very careful about what you say, right? And they say the same thing about anti-Semitism as well. It's just a different form, right? Mm-hmm. So, but again, I would like to know what Rabbi David's view on this.
I share your comments. I think we need to state the obvious, that freedom of speech and incitement are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And most countries have legislation to deal with incitement, especially when it's incitement to do action that is destructive and sentenced and prohibited. And therefore, we need to be able to have legislation to prevent incitement. And I think incitement is not only against the person, but also against a person's dignity. And dignity is not only a matter of their own individuality. Their identity is also a matter of their dignity, and identities are related to religion and culture, and therefore there should be limits to how much free speech is expressed, and the limits reach their limits when they become incitement.
Okay. So let me ask you a historic question, right? I know we're not historians, but it's going to be an interesting question. In the last 1,300 years, there's hardly been a century, perhaps there is, but there are not too many, whereby Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people live totally at peace globally. So the keywords are totally and globally, right? And if we are to change the 21st century to be the exception, where for the first time Muslims, Jews, and Christians would totally live in peace globally, what would that take? What conditions, what measures would it take for that to happen? Yeah. I'll go to the Rabbi first, and then Ruby, you can follow.
So first of all, let me again put your question in context. And say it's not just that there wasn't a century in which Jews, Christian, and Muslim were not living totally peacefully with one another. There wasn't a century in which anybody was living peacefully with another. Yeah. We were living in a brutal world, and therefore it's to suggest that there's something in some way problematic in our religious traditions in particular is actually to deny the fact that the problem is essentially to do with the human personality and in the breast of the human person. And that's what we need to address. And it again also relates to some of the things we've spoken about, fear and ignorance. When something goes wrong, it's easy to blame someone. We don't want to look ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge our responsibility. And we don't always understand what the factors are, therefore. As a result, we cast out these expressions of rejection and even hostility towards one another. But it's not true, of course, to say that there were not periods and places where there wasn't wonderful cooperation and collaboration. And of course, we all hold up the period of the golden age of Spain in Andalusia as an idyllic era in the Middle Ages of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish collaboration. The greatest pearls of wisdom from the ancient Greek world were made accessible through the interaction of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars, Jews very often being the translators because of their facilities with language in this regard. So there have been some wonderful eras. It's an interesting question to look at and see the factors that made this possible. Very often these also need interests. So we need to make sure that there is effective commercial collaboration so that people's needs are met effectively. But we need to ensure that our most sublime positive values are taught. I mean, Islam is a particular example in this regard. I don't know any other religion that specifically says that litarafu, to know one another, is a religious obligation, and that God has created us in our diversity and made us into peoples and nations in order to know one another. In other words, difference is a blessing from God, not something to be seen as a threat. And we need to be able to get to know one another. Similarly, within the prophet Malachi, within the Hebrew Bible, God is seen as extolling the virtue of people, believers who talk with one another. Because when we dialogue with one another, we humanize one another. And when we do not know one another, then we stigmatize one another and we misrepresent one another. So first and foremost, we've therefore got to be engaged in precisely what we're doing now, in dialogue, in interreligious conversation, in interreligious education, and all these different areas. But I would say, despite my love of religion and my passionate conviction and my love of other religions as well as my own, I don't trust humans and I don't trust religious leaders to do what they should do. And therefore, we always need to ensure that there are checks and balances, and that's the value of a secular world. And therefore, it's much healthier. Religion is healthier when it lives in a secular society, where no one religion imposes its will on others, and where they live in creative, constructive tension with one another.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi David Ruby.
Yeah, I think I would say that number one is we should remain as Pancasila state. Never been any religious-based state, whether Islam or other religion, because having Pancasila state, creating more security for anyone, any groups, any religion in Indonesia. We understand that Pancasila also inspired by the religious teaching. I think that is all the universal values. But defending Indonesia as Pancasila state, I think we should also teaching this to our young generation. And number two is addressing grievances, not only in the level of the legal protection, but also teaching our society how actually dealing with diversity, the fact that we are diverse in nature, and how we actually can live in diverse situation is very important. And Indonesia has a bit tricky in terms of the spatial arrangement, where you see that in particularly area like a conflict affected area, mostly Muslim living with a Muslim and Christian living with a Christian. And I think that is dangerous in the future. The government should take action on that and really mitigate that conflict should not happen in the future because of the concentration of a certain population in one area. So another issue that I think the school will play very important for our young generation. Our school are so many, contested by so many values. But I think instead of promoting any particular religion, let the student learning all religions exist in Indonesia whether this is officially or this is the local religion, because they need to learn about diversity and they need to meet the real, that person belonging to a certain religion. They are also human being and we need to respect, and they have feeling like us. And because of that, one of the activity that we done on the ritual called Nyadran is the local ritual on respecting the ancestral grave in Central Java, is really attracted so many young people, because we are able to create space for them to experiencing living with Buddhist people, living with Christian people, living with the different faith. And then not only one day, it's kind of 3 days and engaging with the cultural event, and then reflecting that, oh, this is Indonesia. I miss this. I don't see in my childhood. I already detected in a certain values. And I think this kind of program need to have more and more and engaging interfaith, young people to.
Yes,
to
I agree with you. I remember reading the exam question of my nephew one day, and the question was very good, actually. I like it. The question is, he went to a Muslim school, and the exam question was, if you have a neighbor and he's Christian and he's celebrating Christmas, what do you do? And then ABC, you bring over and you bring gifts and so on and so on.
That's
it's
very
very
nice question.
That's
Yes.
how you educate the children to be tolerant, and I think that should be in the curriculum of all schools. He went to a private Muslim school, so I don't know if that is taught in Muslim public schools as well. But let me read some questions for you from people who are watching. From Alma Najmia from Muhammadiyah. She asks, what kind of behavior should be tolerated by countries as part of freedom of speech? What is the limitation in terms of freedom of speech when it comes to religious issues? Anyone? David?
Well, I've already responded to that. I think the limitation is when it's incitement, and when incitement, and therefore it is a call for destructive action. Then I believe it's something that's prosecutable and should be prosecuted.
Okay, Ruby?
Yeah, I share the same feeling. I think our heart can really measure which one is actually that's freedom of expression, and which one that's actually already hurting somebody. So the word hurting can be physically, or can be mentally, can be psychologically, and the important thing, how we actually can be able to measure if it is too much already and create a tension. I think should be very sensitive on that.
Okay, from Osvaldo from Binus. As the Abrahamic religions are the majority in the world, how would the Abrahamic people help the Buddhist, Hindu, and other religions in terms of religious tolerance and erasing the stereotypes among religions?
So if I may, I think there are two aspects to this question. The first and foremost is the fact that all people are human beings, and our religious tradition teach that we have to treat all human beings with respect.
Yes.
Because the human person is the creation of the creator, the summit of the creation, or in the Hebrew biblical term, created in a divine image. In other words, as the rabbis of the Talmud say, any act of disrespect against another human being is an act of disrespect against God. When that fundamental teaching is taught to people, then they will not abuse their religion. They will understand how to live it according to its most noble values. But there is another aspect, and that is how do the Abrahamic religions view the non-Abrahamic religions? And there, of course, there's a matter of great debate amongst scholars, amongst ulama within Islam, amongst rabbinic authorities in Jewish tradition. But I would say, and of course, there are differences of opinion, and we can tolerate those differences of opinion as long as people are respected as people, first and foremost. But I would say that the essential criterion, and I would base myself also on Jewish sources, the essential criterion for true religion is how people behave. If you say you're a believer, you pray 5 times a day, you observe everything, but you do not behave with respect to another human being, you are not a true believer.
Yes.
You are, in fact, somebody who desecrates the name of your religion.
Mhm.
And therefore, the most important factor is, does a religious tradition encourage people to behave morally, ethically, respectful for one another?
Mhm.
We need to affirm the supremacy of religious ethics. And when we affirm the supremacy of religious ethics, we will see Buddhism and Hinduism, Sikhism, and all the other religions in a very different light, because I do not believe that there is any authentic religion that is not an ethical religion. And therefore, we need to ensure that the supremacy of ethics in terms of our interreligious engagement.
Okay. Let me ask this question from Meisha to Ruby, right? Muslims often talk about non-Muslims as kafirs, right? And this often prevents Muslims from developing positive relations with non-Muslims. What do you say to your fellow Muslims on the need to be careful in how you define and apply the word kafir to other people and non-Muslims? I think this is a very good question.
Yeah.
Please.
So if you refer to the principle of faith as a Muslim, we've been taught that we should believe on, prophets. It's a lot of prophets, and believe on a lot of holy books, and believe on the end of the day, and on and on. And that is very important. It's simple thing we remembering, but in terms of reflecting into our life, it's become more difficult, because the way we understand the principle of faith as a Muslim is very, how do you call it? It's more symbolic thing. Yeah, it should go more deeper, that if you are Muslim, you should believe that God create all the religion and holy books that the Muslim have to respect as well. And the other relating with the what was that? Okay, relating
Kafir, yeah.
with the kafir, it is not easily defined what the voices out there. The kafir has a different meaning, but when I read one of the definition from Kiai Hussein Muhammad, is very clear that this is unbeliever, and this is the person who prevent the kindness, who prevent the development of justice, peace, and some other universal values. And then you have to be very careful on using this. It is relevant to that definition or not. But in the Arabic culture, the kafir is very much easier to mention, because the culture, the culture is not because the definition. It is similar with the word, how do you call it, haram. The word haram is very much every day they use it, but in Indonesia context, we really have to see that it's not as easy, using that word. So my advice is better to find reference that teaching you much more deeply in the kafir, the meaning of the kafir. And then I think it's good to read one of my favorite is Hussein Muhammad, is I think very a prominent scholar, and very much having a lot of reference, classical reference, to give you a lot of justification why that definition need to use it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because when I was small, the term kafir consumed me as a young Muslim, and that made me scared of non-Muslims, made me turn away from them, and so on and so on. But I want to ask this question to David also. What about in Judaism? Do they have that same thing about kafir or infidels? What do they call it in Judaism?
Allow me, please, Pak Dino, before I respond to you, to say that I understand from Pak Yahya Stakuf, the Secretary General of the Nadlatul Ulama, that in fact a decision was made by them at their conference, at their assembly, to reject the very category of kafir, that it's no longer applicable, and therefore to reject it. That is a very dramatic and very important decision. And I remember also that it's not totally novel, because I was privileged to have the friendship many years ago with Gus Dur, who both visited Israel, and I visited Indonesia as his guest, and I heard him say the same thing, that the context simply makes this category inappropriate, and that Islam has to therefore the idea of ijtihad, it has to reapply itself to the changing conditions, and therefore it's no longer. There is Judaism is, if you like, is the beneficiary of its tragedy. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you'll excuse me, going back 2,000 years ago, we were kicked out of our land by the Romans, and even though there were Jews that remained in the land of Israel, in this holy land, nevertheless, the vast majority of Jews were in the diaspora, were traveling, where we were pushed from pillar to post for a variety of different reasons. The fact as a result is that we developed, if you like, a unconscious theology of diversity, of multiculturalism, because we needed to preserve our own identities as a minority. And therefore our approach was live and let live. Let us be what we are and you be what you are. And that, of course, was the result of necessity. But the truth is that in our world today, it is virtue. And therefore, generally speaking, within Judaism, we don't have the problem of discrimination against non-Jews. That doesn't mean that there aren't prejudices to be found in our communities, of course, and especially with our history, there's still prejudices that have to be overcome. But if you take the situation now, even if you take the situation with regards to Israelis and the Palestinians, the conflict here is not a religious conflict, it's a territorial conflict. There are two peoples in this land that each have territorial claims, and unfortunately, as of yet, they haven't learnt how to appropriately respect the claims of each other. In this context, religion gets abused as it's manipulated by each side, both to affirm each one's attachment and often to, unfortunately, tragically, to denigrate the attachments of the other. But when it's used, it's not used on either side, actually, to delegitimize the religion of the other. It's used as maybe sometimes as, if you like, a political tactic, but not to delegitimize the religion of the other. And it's really interesting. I've rarely come across the attitude that I find amongst Palestinians, even amongst militant Palestinians, is not one of disrespect for Judaism. And I do not find amongst Israelis some of the most nationalist and politically extreme element attitudes that are anti-Muslim. No, I don't find those. The problem here is essentially political. And so that's at least some good news.
Yeah, you have a number of Muslims in the parliament, right?
Of course, yes, and a deputy speaker. 20% of Israel are Muslim citizens.
Okay.
And not only that, excuse me, the state of Israel also finances the Sharia court system. So Israel, the state of Israel provides for Sharia courts across the country, and the qadis, the judges, are paid the higher salaries like secular high court judges.
Okay. Well, well, we still got a little bit of time. This next question comes from Noto. Why do you think that more politicians now are resorting to religion as their political tool or platform? Right? And is this good for religion, or is this not good for religion? I ask this to both of you. I think this is an interesting question. Ruby, you want to start first?
Okay, for me,
I think it's happening in Indonesia too, right?
Yeah, very much everywhere. You know, this is crazy, and I feel this is marketable. It has a huge market. Not only just political, any kind of thing in Indonesia have to attach with religion. Then you can get benefit on that, and this is very dangerous. Even for me, it's scary. You know, somebody released about the halal product for refrigerator. It's insane. How that's happened in my country. But the market is very huge, and some people really need a certainty, really needs like a safety, and then they refer to the halal concept. and there is an institution that's actually using it to get benefit on that. So why don't non-halal? Because we are minority, we have minority, so that easier to differentiate it. But halal or haram, that's really the concept that sometimes make me also feel like not comfortable. When I live in Thailand, for example, my friend for Buddhist, she said that why Muslim always call like a Muslim food? What do you mean by Muslim food? And then suddenly they give us like the biryani rice, and then we feel like we're also eating Thai food, but it's cooking differently. But with that, it's very obvious that we have a huge market. And then I think the identity politic has become more and more, kind of get used to, because we don't actually have a strong law enforcement, and particularly to sanction the politician or the political party who who can be proved using the identity politic. I don't see until now any political party bring to the court because of the way they do campaign. Unfortunately, until now we don't have it. So because of that, it's easily for everybody just using it and then getting more and more benefit on that. To counter that, I think we need to have a more, not, and it's not enough that actually the progressive ulama doing counter narrative. It should state strongly to do law enforcement, and looking at our constitution that very much human rights compliance, and use it for providing justice and provide more security and safety for the people.
Okay, David, Rabbi David.
The sages of the Talmud showed an amazing capacity for self-critique 2,000 years ago when they described religion as either Sam HaChayim, the elixir of life, or Sam HaMitah, the potion of death. Religion can become the most ennobling, wonderful, spiritually empowering force, and it can become the most destructive negative element, depending upon how we use it, whether we are true to its most noble values or whether we pervert these in our interests. And it's very tempting for people to manipulate them because, of course, it relates to our passion. And religion is nothing if it's not passion. We feel passionate about it, and therefore once passion is there, it's easily manipulated. And now, I'm not saying that politicians should not come with religious commitment. On the contrary, I think that politics is its most noble when it's driven by the ethical values and teachings of religion. But when religion is treated as a political commodity, then it is prostituted and then it is destroyed. That's why I am against the whole phenomenon of so-called religious political parties, which unfortunately we have in Israel. I have never, ever voted for a religious political party because I believe that such structures are the prostitution of religion, because you treat religion as a commodity, as a bargaining tool in terms of political interests, whereas it should be the inspiration and the values that lead you ahead. The question of religious extremism is another issue. And of course, what Ruby was talking about in Indonesia, and with regards to, if you like, a certain Islamic fanaticism, of course, we have that within Judaism as well. And very often it's, people think they are more virtuous by therefore being stricter, whereas very often strictness is simply running away from some of the issues. It was really very amused by the example she gave with regards to halal food. Of course, we have the similar thing. Kosher food is a whole big industry. And it's a very important industry, but sometimes it's taken to ridiculous extents. And I've even seen a kosher certification on a bottle of soda water. I mean, what, that's H2O and CO2. What do you need a kosher certification for that? But people therefore want to, often it's, if you like, a kind of security. It's a safety blanket. If everything is absolutely identified as either haram or halal, everything is either kosher or treif, everything, then you don't need to think for yourself. And that's terrible. God created us with a brain, with a mind, and with a soul precisely in order to think for ourselves, not in order to rebel, but in order to think. And therefore, we need to encourage people to understand that thought and mind and heart are to be true to our religions, not to betray them, God forbid.
Okay. So our next question is from Muhammad Irfan. The leader of Malaysia stated that the challenge for world peace is not the conflict between religions, but the conflict between extremism in all religions against moderates in all religions, which is why there was a call for coalition for the moderates, global coalition for the moderates. How do you think that is going at the moment? What is the state of play of this coalition of the moderates globally? Go ahead, David, you can start first. You seem like you want to say something. Yeah.
No, this is an occupational hazard for any member of the clergy, whether Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. We always have something to say about everything. Sometimes we need to listen more than to speak. But I strongly believe that the statement that today the divisions are not between religions but within the religions is very correct. It's the distinction between approach to the world, which is open, embracing, and celebratory, as opposed to an attitude which is closed, insular, isolationist, and therefore, if you like, is alienated from the rest of the world. And we all have these phenomena within our own communities, and therefore it's really important. In fact, part of the wonderful thing that I was talking about right at the beginning of the amazing burgeoning world of interfaith relations and collaboration that we've never ever had before, as we have today, is precisely a reflection of this coalition of moderates. It's a coalition. I don't like the term moderate very much because moderate sounds as if you're not passionate. I want people to be passionate about their religion, but I want them to be passionate in a manner which respects others and embraces that diversity. And I think that coalition of people who are able to celebrate one another, that is getting bigger all the time. Politics is a real problem because politics essentially is going to manipulate division almost by definition. I don't know exactly who the political leaders is being referred to in Malaysia, but I do recall that Mr. Mahathir claimed that the Jews are the problem behind everything in the world. And he's the one who's given all kinds of stereotypes to Jews, etc. And that comes out of the fact that Malaysia is a country that's completely ignorant about Jews and Judaism. There are not only no Jews there, they won't allow any interaction with Jews and Judaism. And so that's silly, that's self-destructive. If you having no relations with anybody doesn't serve your interests. It's in your interest to be as open society because that will be to your benefit. In the end, saying no to anybody in the end is simply cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yes. It was actually Prime Minister Najib actually who mentioned that coalition of moderates.
Well, that's a big difference.
Ruby.
Yeah, I want to give an example. This is also, for me, is a positive development among progressive voices. I don't mind call it moderate as well. So, for example, in the case of Indonesia Women Ulama Congress, in short we call KUPI, it contains of 100 of the Islamic boarding school, and a lot of how do you call it, institution that actually running a religious circle or Majlis Ta'lim, and also the study center that actually study about Islamic Islam, and they came together under one umbrella because they're realizing that the gender narrative that very conservative mind that proposed by fundamentalist group that actually causing a lot of gender-based violence in Indonesia. And we believe that Islam promotes women's rights, and we believe that Islam promotes equality. And they gather together, and then they actually intensively using the counter narrative in social media. And what is surprising is actually the balancing voices in social media between the very conservative or even extreme idea about the women, and as well as the progressive one. And that is very important for our young people to find the alternative voices, because every time they are accessing in internet and social media, there's always a come or trap into the chatting room with the conservative group. And now they're having a lot of choices. And if you see civil society right now, in particularly who are using Islamic base, then they have tendency to have more and more collaboration. For example, like my organization, we don't have particularly media, but we're supporting the media, the Islamic media that promoting progressive voices, and we don't mind about that because that is important. So the media, it doesn't need attached in my organization. It can be there, but our support can be useful for them to write more and more, a narrative, and that is very important.
Well, thank you very much. I think the key message is that the moderates are the majority, but often they are too much of silent majority. And I remember in our experience in Indonesia, there were times when the moderates didn't say much when there's terrorist attacks, and serious extremism happening and so on. So I think the moderates everywhere, Muslims, Jewish, and Christians, are obliged really to always speak up and push back when they see their values being challenged, right? So with that, we have come to the end of our discussion. I'm really feeling sorry for Ambassador Musi. He's been gone the whole time, but it's because he's got internet issues in Ethiopia. So our thoughts are with him. And David, I got to tell you that the one place in the world I've always wanted to visit but haven't had the opportunity is Jerusalem. I really want to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque. So one day I'm going to land there at the airport. I'm going to call you up.
I can even offer you hospitality. We have a spare room, so whenever you want to come, I'll be delighted to host you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you. I may just take you up on that, right? So, but thank you very much. But make sure you take me to a good meal, good restaurant, because I'm a foodie. Yeah. So
I'd be happy to. You should, but bear in mind that I'm vegan.
That's fine. That's fine. So thank you very much, David, Rabbi David. Thank you very much, Ruby. And Rabbi David, I really appreciate all the advice you've given to the 1,000 Abrahamic circles. And we hope we can continue to count on your advice and friendship. Yeah. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you know, I got COVID 3 months ago. Yeah, it was quite serious. And so I'm a COVID survivor. And it's something you don't want to have, really. So please stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you, Pa.
Family is safe as well. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi David. Thank you, Pa.
Thank you, Pak.
Bye, Pak Dino.